I think let's start the session right on time while others can still join in. We had more than 100 and more than close to 150 participants confirmed, and the session is also being streamed live on YouTube. We also have more eye catchers and watchers on the YouTube panel session also. So with this, I'll request my colleague Kapil to first come in and just announce the house announcements, and then we'll start the proceedings.
Sure. Thank you so much, Uday. So good evening, everyone, and welcome to the webinar, Atmanirbhar Bharat and Cross-Border Data Flows. So before we begin, I would like to take you all through the protocols of the event for the better flow of the event and to avoid any commotion or any confusion in the event. So first, all participants and panelists are requested to be on mute for the duration of the event. The host shall unmute the speakers as and when necessary. In case there is a technical obstacle from the host side, he will request the speaker to unmute themselves. Post the panel discussion, there will be a round of open discussions where questions will be taken from all the participants. Participants can post their questions through the chat option that is present on your screen. The question should be directed to the host. Depending on the availability of time, questions will be appropriately selected and put forward for discussion. Last, if any panelist or participant wants to intervene during the length of the webinar, they should do so by raising the hand. An option is still available on your Zoom screen for that. Or you can raise your concern in the chat box with the host. And with that, I would like to invite Mr. Uday Mehta for his opening remarks. Thank you.
Thank you, Kapil. Good evening, everyone. I hope I'm audible. I'm happy to welcome all of you for the Kutch webinar, Atmanirbhar Bharat and Cross-Border Data Flows. Today's webinar and the panel discussion will be focused on understanding the importance of digital services exports for the Indian economy. Given the Prime Minister's call for Atmanirbhar Bharat, which primarily means self-reliant India, to enable the resurgence of the Indian economy, the topic of today's session is extremely important. We have a blooming IT and business process management industry, which is well recognized as one of the global leaders in the digital services exports. Even government's official reports have noted that the IT and business process management industry holds a value of significance for India to be able to achieve the target of USD $5 trillion GDP by 2025. The IT BPM industry has also seen a consistent growth over the last decade and has huge potential in contributing to the economy. Taken all the factors together, including the unfettered free flow of data and market access to Indian companies in foreign countries, India is in a strategic position to strengthen its leadership in the IT BPM industry and further advance its growth from its participation in the digital trade using cross-border data flows. This brings us to the second important aspect of today's webinar and the discussion, which is on restrictions on cross-border data flows and its impact on India's digital services exports and the GDP. Given the COVID-19 pandemic has added to the woes of the already ailing economy, thus we must discuss the policy and the economic implications of cross-border data flow restrictions on the economy. To take this forward this evening, the important deliberations, we have an eminent panel today consisting of Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, Dr. Amar Patnaik. We are grateful to him for contributing the forward for the Kutch report on data localization, which will be released today in a minute. Then we have Dr. Gulshan Rai, Ms. Ankhi Das, and Mr. Deepak Maheshwari, and my senior colleague, Mr. Bipul Chatterjee, who's going to conduct the panel discussion and also deliver the presentation on the report. With this, we will just do a very brief digital release of the Kutch report on data localization. I'll request my colleague to just showcase the report title on the Zoom panel for all of us to see that. And that in a way marks the release of the report in this new norm of doing conferences. So that's the report which is being released today. We will also share the link of the report on the chat box in a minute for all the participants and the speakers. And we will also share the report later today in the evening. With this, I request my senior colleague, Mr. Chatterjee, to take forward the proceedings. Thank you very much and look forward to an extremely rich and an engaging discussion.
Thank you, Uday. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It's great to meet you over this digital platform. And many of us, we have been meeting for years in different platforms, in different locations. Now, these COVID-induced digital meetings, I don't know whether it is going to become a new normal or not. What I do know is that given this huge disruption which has taken place, not just to our economy, but also to our life, it's going to take much time for us to get back to an equilibrium. I deliberately said an equilibrium because though the jury is still to be out, I think we are not going to go back to the old equilibrium. There is going to be a new equilibrium. What would be the path? We still do not know fully, but partially we do know. Now, before I come to this presentation, let me flag one particular point, which is that, as you will see in the presentation, the title of the presentation is same as the title of the study which we did recently. Let me also join my colleague Uday in thanking all of you, particularly Dr. Patnaik, for writing the foreword to our report. Now, if you see the title, it says Data Localization, India's Double-Edged Sword. Of course, during my presentation, I'm going to explain why we are calling it a double-edged sword with a question mark. Whereas the title of today's event is Atmanirbhar Bharat and Cross-Border Data Flows. So one may perhaps get confused that are we talking about two different things? The answer, the simple answer is no. And towards the end of my presentation, maybe after the panel discussion, I will explain why there is significant overlap, if not total overlap, between the two. Now, we did this study recently where we looked at the impact of data localization, quote unquote data localization, on our digital service export. That's the central question or central theme of our study. So may I now request my colleagues to please put the presentation. It's a very brief presentation. I think in terms of numbers, there are about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 substantial slides. Can I have the presentation, please? Now, while talking about our digital service export, next slide. Let me begin with a little bit of a background. By DSE, we mean Digital Service Export, not Delhi School of Economics. We know that India is a leading exporter of digital services. In 2018 and 19, it was almost $118 billion. But that's not the story. The story is that it is more than 50% of our total service export. Then you can understand the importance of digital services in our service export. This is the latest data that we have. We are yet to get the data for 2019 and 20. But I am sure that it has gone up. We do not know what is going to happen in 2020-21. But I will not be surprised if there is further growth in it. Our share, India's share in global service export is just about 3%, whereas in this case, our share is more than 10%. So that's the importance of this sector. That's the can you stop fiddling? That's the importance of this sector for the Indian economy and various other sectors which are related to digital services. United States and Canada, they are the two major markets of our digital services. They account for more than 60% of our digital service export. And the reason why I'm emphasizing this, when we looked at data localization, quote unquote, that regime, we have looked at in a manner, and I'm going to explain it very soon, which will help us understanding the kind of regime that we want to pursue. If there is, quote unquote, again, reciprocity, then what would be the impact on this sector in our economy? It is a no-brainer that the growth of this sector, like any other sector, it depends on policies, not just in India, but also in markets where we are delivering this export. And we have also found out, just to give you an idea of the importance about this sector, the relationship between growth in digital service export and growth in on the total size of our economy. 1% increase leads to 0.02%. In terms of percentage, you may think that it is small, but actually it is not. And when you see this in a much more holistic manner, in respect to money multiplier in particular, you will understand how important it is. Next slide, please. Now, if we look at the concentration of this sector, or the location of this sector, perhaps that is the right word. So these are the 5 states in India. 3 of them are in southern India: Tamil Nadu, Telangana, Karnataka. Then of course Maharashtra. Then Delhi NCR region. Not only that, we looked at the pan-India data, but also we looked at these major states who are contributing to this sector and to the growth of sector. And again, it is a no-brainer that the growth in digital service export is not just positively related with the growth of the size of the state economy, but also that is in some cases very high, except in case of Delhi NCR, which I would say is a late starter. But in places like Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and now Telangana, this is statistically very, very significant. And therefore, it also underlines, once again, the importance of this sector for not just the overall growth of the Indian economy, but for these states who are together, if I look at it slightly differently, also contributing more than 50% of our GDP. So that's the importance of this sector that we are talking about. Now, here comes the catch. For quite some time now, I don't exactly remember the timeline or time frame, we have been hearing this term data localization. Also, we have been hearing that data is the new oil, that great resource which drives our economy. Now, we do not really know in the beginning, what does that mean? What does data localization mean? There are a number of myths whereas realities are different, were different. Now, with this Sri Krishna Committee report, with this private, what you call Personal Data Protection Bill of 2019, we have a better understanding of data localization. Then we also looked at how it is being done, it's being treated in other parts of the world. Fortunately, there is a report which comes very useful. We also took a very close look at the European regime, and we found that when you looked at the features, the provisions, the clauses of our Personal Data Protection Bill, we found that there are a lot of similarities between the expected or proposed, not expected, proposed Indian regime on data localization and the European regime. Therefore, what we did through slightly complicated, perhaps not complicated, depending on, there's a lot of subjectivity here, depending on how you look at it, econometric modelings. We try to understand the impact of the Indian regime on our digital service export, A, and B, on our GDP, on the size of our economy. Next slide, please. The beauty is, or the challenge is, that we cannot do this in isolation. As I said before in my first slide, that this is a sector which depends hugely on policies, not just in India, the originating country, but also in the recipient countries. So we have looked at various scenarios, 7 in particular, in total, sorry. So through our econometric exercise, we found that if we adopt cross-border data flow, CBDF, cross-border data flow, certain restrictions, and if our regime, which as per the, let me refer this, as per the report of, where has it gone? This, yeah, data policies ranking, so ranked by OECD. India's current ranking is 42, which means the lower the ranking, more restrictive you are. We are not that restrictive, by the way. Of course, we are much more restrictive than many other countries, including United States. US's ranking is 50 in a scale of 0 to 100, whereas our ranking is 42. But if we adopt this regime, then our ranking will become 21, half of what we are today. That means we are putting more restrictions on cross-border data flow. What would be the impact on our digital services? We have found that there will be an impact, definitely, and it's going to be about 10% of what it was before. Now, we also looked at the regime in Vietnam, which is much more restrictive than ours. Their ranking is 9th. Of course, Russia is most restrictive. We didn't look at the Chinese regime. If our regime becomes more restrictive than what it is proposed now, and become like that of Vietnam, then the impact will be more than what it might have been. So we found this figure 16%. Now the beauty is, as I said before, that it's not just our regime, but the others And we have made a simple assumption of reciprocity. If our regime becomes like that of European Union and United States also become like that of European Union, what would be the impact? If we become like Vietnam, but US remain like EU, what would be the impact? If we like Vietnam and US also becomes Vietnam, what would be the impact? And similarly, finally we got this final scenario that we have become like Vietnam, which means much more restrictive in terms of cross-border data flow. US also becomes like Vietnam, and all other countries, they also become like Vietnam. Then the impact will be 19%. So from what it is today, our digital service export is going to come down by 19%. Let's say 20%. So the range is between 10 to 20%. And this is significant. We have then translated into value, and we found that, and then translated into the value term in respect to what would be our projected export value in 2025. Then 10% of that, 20% of that. Then our projected value in 2025 is $1 trillion for the digital economy objective, digital service export objective. Then the impact would be somewhere between 19 billion to 36 billion. It may sound not that much, but when I look at its multiplier effects, when I look at the entire supply chain or value chain of this sector, then definitely it is quite significant. Next slide, please. I'm sorry, I'm taking some more time. Then similarly, we looked at the GDP. Next slide, please. And we found again in a similar 7 scenarios, and we then benchmarked it in 2025. We expect that the size of the Indian economy is going to become $5 trillion. And if we adopt this kind of regimes, then that will translate to a loss of 9 billion to 17 billion. Again, as I said, this is just one figure, and we should take this figure with a pinch of salt, because that is not telling the entire story. Unless we look at the money multiplier effect, we won't be able to, and we can make certain assumptions. The scope of this work, the TOR was such that we couldn't look at the whole scenario. But suddenly we made some recommendations towards the end, which are the issues that we need to discuss. Next slide, please. Now we also looked at certain other impact areas. For example, investment. And here the scenario is that we've looked at a particular paper written by Wire and others, but the modeling is there. And based on that, it's complete data localization, by the way. So if we go for complete data localization, we are going to see and this is one sector where we are getting a lot of investment. We are going to see some significant impact on investment by 2025 or in 2025. Similarly, welfare. In case of welfare, we are talking about the wages or income of stakeholders, of workers who are engaged in this sector. Again, we found that there is going to be a significant impact. So these are the costs that we are talking about. about. Now, there are certain benefits also, and there is a lot of articles, papers have also been written about this. The data localization is going to help us innovate. But at the same time, there is also literature that restrictions also hinder innovation. Then there is compliance cost. There is also a thought process that data localization is going to help us establishing data centers all over the country. In our country, in particular location, where this sector is quite advanced. So we need to look at all these things, and then we need to take a call, and a balanced call, I would say. Definitely we need security, data security, particularly our personal data. So what type of personal data which we need complete security, if not complete, I mean good security. Then there are other types of data as well, which may not require that kind of data localization norms or policies. So my final point at this stage is that we have to look at it, while on the one hand we have to look at it very holistically. At the same time, if we apply same thought process on all types of data, then I think we're not going anywhere. We're doing a disservice to the nation. So we have to think differently, innovatively on how we're going to treat what kind of data from the point of view of security, as well as from encouraging innovation for the growth of this sector. This is also going to create much more employment than what it is today. So all these things have to be taken into account before taking a final call on the personal data protection bill that we have. So with that, let me stop here, but I will come back later on this Atmanirbhar Bharat part and how we can relate these two subjects. Thank you. Now, as I understand from the agenda, now we are going to have a panel discussion, and we have, as Uday has rightly said in the beginning, we have an excellent panel. And Uday, would you like to make any introductory remarks before we start the panel discussion?
Not at this stage, sir. I'll come back to it in the end. I think given the time, we can go straight into the panel, and over to you.
Thank you. We are running late by, I think, by 5 minutes, but that's not much of an issue. So let me go to the panel. As I said, we have an excellent panel. We are very thankful to them. Let me start with Mr. Rai. So I think even after, let's say, considerable period of time, still there is a lot of confusion about quote-unquote data security. There is one school of thought that if the data, particularly personal data, is stored inside the country, then it is secure. I don't know how. Only under that condition it can be secured. Then there is another school of thought which says that if we locate our data in certain locations with whom we have better reciprocal relations in those countries, then they can be made as secured as we locate them in our country. So what I would like to know from you, sir, that there are certain myths, there are certain realities about data security. So what is the current state of data security in our country, And how do you see that going forward? How do you see this regime going to evolve over a period of time? So over to you, sir. And I would request you, not just Mr. Rai, but all panelists, to make 2 or 3 sharp points which will help us deliberation which is continuing in our country. Of course, we have 2 rounds of such discussion in today's webinar. So over to you, Mr. Rai.
Thank you, Mr. Chatterjee. First of all, I must compliment you for a very good presentation, presenting the argument not for the data localization, but you have presented the argument why data localization will harm the interests of the country. And you have also said something concept about the security aspects there. Let me be clear to you at this forum. Look, I am not representing or speaking for the government. I have no brief for the government. But then, having known the realities and facts of that side, it would get reflected in what I will say. The ITS business or the software business, I must clarify that the data is stored not in India. Data is stored abroad. The units here only access the data from their servers and send it back there. So the issue of security of data is from their side, it was never said from our side. But then there are associated issues also over there. So the issue of security has been raised by and large to confusing the entire localization issue or cross-border issues are there. If I have to argue in favor or in against the localization, I will have a different reason. I will different argue that way, but not on the issue of a GDP growth or business growth and that kind of thing. I will not argue that. The security posture of India is as good as any other country abroad there. Every country is facing attacks. We are also facing attacks there. We are also preventing attacks successfully, and many successive, very serious attacks have been prevented by us. India has seen more than 200% rise in the cyber attacks during the last couple of months, and that is true for across the world because of the work from home kind of a culture. And any of the country, the equipment which we are using at home, they are not secure as the equipment or the systems are secured in the corporate sector. So the reason for data localization, well, this is not my case. I'm only clarifying the issue that the reason for data localization, which has come up from certain quarters in the country, is on some other ground that the data, it takes a lot of time. The data is denied to make it available in many of the cases, investigation cases, crime cases, security cases. That's the issue. Everybody has said it. And I have the experience of more than a decade, Mr. Chatterjee, struggling the issues there. And some of the panelists are here whom I have been dealing with them, interacting with them. But I would also admit that the position in the country today is much more different than what I have faced it in the last 10 years there. So I don't think issue of security is the ground. Security issue ground is from the other side, not from our side. Okay. The issue of trade kind of a thing, which Mr. Chatterjee you have said, is also I will have a difference of view. See, the two things are happening worldwide. One, that the entire technology is becoming a flat technology. Altogether different kind of a scenario is emerging in the technology, is a completely borderless there. At the same time, our minds are becoming exactly opposite direction. The same GDPR, which you said about it, GDPR said you can't do that. You have to agree to my condition and then you can store the data, or you can take the data out of the European condition. That's one way of doing it. So is the case with every other country says that. So I think arguing the case on that ground, I will not like to do that. If I have to argue the case, I'll not touch security And I can quote you n number of instances in this country. In this country, one of my friend Aki is over here on the panel there. The UPI, all the multinational companies, all the social media companies are in the UPI. One of the condition is that they need to be audited. But has it audit happened? Has the audit been allowed? So I don't think we should get into those reasons. If I have to argue, I would say we must look at data localization in some different aspects there, which is the technology. In era of AI or in era of the automated car or no driver car or IoT, the whole technology is becoming a flat technology. For example, today itself, this seminar or this webinar is being must have been attended by people from different parts of the world. We are in totally flat network there. Their data is flowing seamlessly. Video, audio, data is flowing everywhere. Data is being recorded by the server is going on. So I think the whole concept of localization or the cross-border data, in my view, need to be seen from the technology point of view. There was a case of RBI 6 April 2018 put forward a regulation that all the payment data will be stored in India. Have been able to enforce it? My answer is no. RBI may say. RBI reply you can see in the Supreme Court. It's a different kind of reply. So my issue is that yes, I was also part of the Justice Krishna Committee. There was a localization. There were certain views. The report has come up. Whether we agree, but it's a part of the committee report there. But we need to look at in the last 2 years. In 2 years, situation has changed. Why don't we look at whether in the technology scenario, emerging scenario, we will be able to enforce any localization. It's not for us to see. It's for every other country also had to see. That is one. Second thing is that even if we enforce the data localization, what will happen? We need to recognize the other countries have to recognize our law and we need to recognize their law. Will that happen? So my principle is that let us not talk about the security. Why should we talk about the security? That we are securing better and other countries are not securing better. That cannot be the argument. And I don't think we will stand on that argument. We will not stand on the argument. We will be able to stand on the argument. My view, your view could be different. Other views could be different. We will not be able to stand on the argument of economic because we have seen the issue of GDPR. In spite of so much regulation, in spite of so much problem, they are doing business there. They are putting the condition. And so the case is CBPR, which is there, and ultimately US also, there is the Cloud Act. There is the Cloud Act there. Okay, we are not recognizing, we are not recognizing anything, and either they recognize, not we are recognized. The business is going there with the US, with the Europe, something is going on under some different pretext, a different way there. So in my view, the only argument is that let us look at the technology. It has passed 2 years since the Justice Krishna Committee report came. It will take another 2 years for the legislation to be enforced. After 2 years, what will be the scenario of the technology? Whether we should be able to sustain the concept which we are putting in the act there, whether we will be able to enforce that concept, looking at the technology, whether we will be able to enforce that kind of a concept. That's what I think we all collectively need to see. And we should be frank enough to admit whatever is the reality and factual position is there, incorporate. If we, and there I will enforce the business there. If we don't recognize the factual realities, if we don't realize the factual scenario which is emerging, then business will suffer. As of now, I will not accept the argument. My view, please, sorry, I'm not hesitating to say that I don't agree with you there. But if we don't recognize the reality, take into account the factuality, our system, our business will get impacted.
Thank you, Mr. Rai. I'll not make any comment at this stage. I mean, we have heard you that we need to look at this subject from the lens of technologies, and that is changing so fast. Sorry.
I'm saying look at the subject from the lens of technology. I'm saying look at the subject from the lens of enforceability and legality.
Yeah, okay. But technologies are changing so fast. So today we may have this act, Personal Data Protection Act. I mean, right now it is a bill, it can become an act very soon. But, and as you said, the enforceability of the law, that is also going to take some time in order for it to become enforceable. By that time, technology can change, and it's happening, and it's going to happen. So how are you going to then balance this? One is the technological part of the matter, the other is the political part of the matter. So let me request Mr. Chandrasekhar, Honorable Member of Parliament, who is dealing with this subject very closely for the last several years, about his view on what Mr. Rai has said. We need to look at it from technology and enforceability rather than data localization per se. But how are we going to create a better environment, a better political buy-in for this approach? So what is your thinking on this subject? Over to you, Mr. Chandrasekhar.
Thank you. Thank you, Uday. Thank you, Ms. Chatterjee, for having me here in this very interesting conversation and this amongst such an eminent panel. Look, I have crossed swords with Dr. Rai for many years on many issues, ranging from net neutrality to this whole issue of data protection. And I will continue to disagree with the approach that people in the government take to policy making of this sector. So just to say that this is not new, I don't think Dr. Rai will be surprised at my position, and nor should anybody be. I personally believe, strongly believe, and I have made this point repeatedly, that these kind of approaches to policy making, whether it is data localization, whether it is some kind of intermediary guidelines amendments to address the security requirements, are all typical knee-jerk, narrow policy responses without understanding or without, in a sense, with let's say with no need to look at this from a holistic sectoral point of view. So I will say that, and then I want to make a few points. Look, I think, Mr. Chatterjee, what you said is absolutely right. India is, and India's IT sector and the technology sector is a very important part of our economy. It becomes more so after post-COVID, because we are living in a world where digitization opportunities are going to be growing. And India today is an economy that has to grow and has to look for areas of growth. And the services sector, the IT, technology, apps, the entire gamut is a huge opportunity that India must pursue with a focus and determination to excel, succeed, and increase its share. I see for ourselves a target of $500 billion in tech exports. And I don't mean just tech as in outsourcing or IT solutions, also in the mobile app space, which in itself today is a $600 billion worldwide market in which India has a very small presence. So it is a big area. And for that, if you step back, anybody today in India, even if you're the smallest stakeholder in this, you will agree that for sustained investment, sustained growth, policy making in this area must be consistent, well thought through, and must avoid conflict and complexity, because disruptive consequences arising out of one's policy on the other part of the ecosystem is totally unnecessary. Now, the argument has been made repeatedly by many people in the government that security somehow is this big, huge issue that will put as secondary every other consideration in policy making and regulation in the technology space. And I reject that completely. I reject that because it is symptomatic of a fundamental problem in India and where we are today in the tech space. The tech space in India has grown because of lack of government policies. It has been enabled by entrepreneurship. Without recognizing that, if you start making policies with a very narrow perspective of, let's say, security, as the case is today, as I have seen today in the intermediary guidelines that they went up and down, and they want WhatsApp and Telegram to reveal decryption at the request of the government, and all kinds of very, very retrograde. You will find that the security argument is a perfectly valid argument, but we have to look at this entirety. And I want to make a few points on this, and I will participate in the conversation that follows. COVID-19 we are now operating in the post-COVID-19 space. COVID-19 brings three specific new issues onto the table vis-a-vis the global economy and in a sense technology. One is about sovereignty. Sovereignty is a clear and present issue now for every nation in this world, whether it is data sovereignty, whether it is economic sovereignty, whatever. The second is reciprocity. As you saw with China, reciprocity now will take over from the old regime of WTO and a global multilateral trade regime. And the third is, like I said, there is going to be increased investment in technology and digitization. In this context, I want to make, in this backdrop, I want to make three fundamental points, which I think people in policy making tend to forget, and it is our business. Even though I am a policymaker, it is my business as well to remind them. Privacy today in India is a fundamental right. Nobody, no secretary of the government, no minister of the government, no member of parliament, nobody can strip that fundamental aspect away. Privacy is a fundamental right granted by the Supreme Court to every Indian citizen, number one. And therefore that defines, you cannot have the matey decide what is personal data, somebody else decides what is non-personal data. That is for me to decide. A citizen will decide what he wants to decide is available in the public domain. Second, policy making and regulation today is piecemeal. And I will say this with the greatest respect to policymakers. We are retrofitting conventional approaches to security, conventional approaches to safety and protection in the cyberspace. It is like that famous answer in Parliament when somebody asked the minister, what are the data protection things for Aadhaar? And the answer was, we have 8-foot walls and we have CISF contingents around the database. So there is almost a sense that you are taking these conventional old school models to enabling and regulating security on the internet. I will argue data localization is one such idea. It is actually let us not call it data localization, call it forced data storage in India. And it has many, many downstream connotations of choice, price, technology, innovation. And now to bring this in the context of Atmanirbhar Bharat, it smacks of protectionism and it smacks of autarky and it smacks of a particular agenda of a few companies who want to create data centers in India. So we have to be very clear. Data localization it gives you very limited incremental benefits. If the argument is that because the data center is next door, 5 kilometers away, and that gives you better access to data, that is, in my opinion, a flawed reading of the world of the internet. There have to be bilateral agreements between nations in terms of data sharing. Those are the ways to look at data access. And the issue is of data access. And that data access problem can be solved in many other ways without creating and disrupting the innovation, choice, technology characteristics that characterize our technology sector. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. I get your point that we cannot look at data, quote unquote, and its security from the in a traditional sense of security. This is something like arguing that let us not build our roads, particularly in border areas, because then our enemies can come to us faster. And we have also heard that in the parliament. There are many such quotes which you can make. But at the same time, it's politically important. Somebody can tweet that, look, our data is not secured because we are not storing it in our country. And people do not know. I mean, even normal common people, common citizens of our country, neither they know nor they are bothered. I can give you my own example. Perhaps not that familiar with this internet space, particularly online shopping and all those things. And COVID-19 induced me to do that. So when I'm unable to access my basic needs, when I see that I can access them through online, I'm not that bothered about security. It's the other access to basic needs that becomes much more important. Therefore, let me come to Mr. Patnaik. That how can we have heard Mr. Rai, we have heard Mr. Chandrasekhar, how can he politically balance these two views and go to common citizens of our country to explain them that look, by storing data in our own country is not that we become secured. And by not storing in our country, we become insecure. It's not that black and white, it's not that linear. So what kind of political messaging and how, more importantly, that you think we should do? Over to you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Vipul Chatterjee and Uday. Thank you to the other members in the panel. Of course, I have been engaged with Vipul on this topic before, and have written a couple of articles on this topic. My view, of course, what Rajiv said, and Dr. Rai, of course, I talked at length with him in a seminar sometime in February or January in Delhi. I have argued for, you see, you must first see the genesis has been talked about, that the RBI started this notification and the circular for storing the payment data. Now, I want to look at these two aspects little separately. One is data, and I argue with, and I agree completely with what Rajiv said about the security of the data. Or just because you can have access, you can't retrofit. You can't just think that physical security is the only way data security can be ensured. In fact, that's too puerile, and to think that that is the only way. I would probably think that it will be only very few in the policy making space who would be thinking that way. If they are, then I think it is unfortunate, and they should not actually be making the policy on data at all. But India is in a different league altogether in the IT space, ITES space, in AI, and we are picking up to. So security is not the main issue. The other one would be, I think the point is sovereignty. I mean, given the context of the current problem with Indochina, with China, post-COVID, COVID related to the country's sovereignty should not be compromised. Now, I don't think that data localization, whether it is storage of data, insisting on storage of data inside the country or outside, we can have a blanket kind of a policy to say that this, and even here, I think the sensitive data in the data protection bill has been suggested to be back within 24 hours, and critical data just cannot be done anything. and which will be decided by the government. These kind of issues, therefore, I've been insisting that has to be within the domain not of the government, but with a very, very strong data protection authority. Unfortunately, the data protection authority that we have we haven't really, it's in the discussion page with Rajiv would say that what has been proposed by us is, I think that there I'll agree with Dr. Rai that the functional capability or the ability to enforce and operationalize these provisions, I don't think that is there with what has been suggested. There is a problem with the structure. I'm looking at the DPA from two angles. One is problem with the structure that we have talked about, written independence, many other things. One is the functional aspect. Do you realize that you will be dealing with data which is being handled, may not be even in the electronic space, in a Gram Panchayat, and you go and ask for this data, and that could probably be given away by somebody because that data education has not been given to that fellow. And there is only one single authority who is going to do this. Decentralization is the issue. Technology capability to enforce is actually the biggest issue. So if you are insisting on data localization only to be able to do this even by a DPA and independent DPA, it may not actually happen. So first, technology is moving at a very fast pace. But if you are looking at, I'm not looking at, I think we should not be politicizing this. So I don't think politically handling is the word which Vipulji used is probably. I don't want to look at it politically. What I'm trying to look at it is, it should be good for the country. Now, so what I've argued is, I think instead of dumping it completely, the data localization is not possible, is not required, it is harmful to the economy. I would probably suggest, I am of the opinion that if number of data centers come up, if the cost of storage of data comes down, if the cost of processing of data comes down, if an environment is created, if an ecosystem is created for data storage and processing in India itself, because of this policy, I think we should encourage it. We should accept it. So the policymakers and the government should be looking at it from a point of view of not really forcing and mandating data localization, but should be looking at incentivizing it. So I always say that it is a push and pull strategy. What the RBI has done is ramming it down the throat that you have to do this. Whereas if finance minister says in the 2021 budget that, you please have data centers, we'll incentivize it, we'll do this. I think this, and what even the Atmanirbhar thing, I will link it here to say that you do this. I think that would be good, and therefore the regulatory approach should be a sandbox kind of a thing. You look at it and give them the space. Then only this. So I would not like to trash completely data localization, because I was with the audit department with the CAG when I audit the IT systems of railways. We have done the network of your GST network. We have many things we have done, and I'll tell you very frankly, during many of the investigations, audit investigation is even a final stage. During even audit, we used to have problems of access to data. So I think some amount of if there is a policy, we should take advantage of it from a point of view of making an economic sense, make India the capital for data storage and processing. What you are doing in the United States, where the servers are there, most of the servers are there, or in Canada, could probably be done in India. Let us make this as an opportunity and look at it from that point of view. That's my take.
Thank you, Patnaik, for this particular perspective, and I think that fits nicely into the next speaker, where I'm going to pose a question to him. That Mr. Maheshwari, that instead of looking at it, and this is, I think, the central message which we are getting so far, instead of looking at it from a narrow and traditional sense of security, if we look at it differently, more in terms of a positive agenda for the benefit, current and future benefit of the Indian economy. So do you think, Mr. Maheshwari, that what would be an alternate approach? Should we not look at it in respect to the whole digital ecosystem which is still developing in our country? Is it that we should look at it more in respect to a strategy for ensuring better cybersecurity as against the narrow focus of storing our data within our country? So over to you, Mr. Maheshwari, in about 6 to 8 minutes. We're running late, slightly late. Over to you, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Vipul, and thanks Uday and everybody else. And it's good to be with Dr. Rai, Dr. Patnaik, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, and of course Dr. Gulshan Rai, as well as Anki here. So when we are looking at this aspect of data localization, I just want to go back to what the Honorable Prime Minister mentioned just today afternoon while addressing the Global Week. What he said that Atmanirbhar Bharat merges domestic production and consumption with global supply chains. And I just want to emphasize on these three words, global supply chains. Atmanirbhar Bharat is not about being self-contained or being close to the world. It is about being self-sustaining and self-generating. We will pursue policies that promote efficiency, equity, and resilience. Now this is unquote. So this is the second last para from his speech just this afternoon. So when we are looking at these global supply chains, these are not just about the physical goods. These also equally apply to the services realm. And increasingly, when we are looking at the data of the global trade, if we see, increasingly it is being digitized in two different ways. One is obviously the component of services is on the rise in terms of trade. And secondly, even in terms of the goods, the digital component within those goods is also increasing. And let me just give you an example. For example, you could be exporting jewelry, but if that jewelry has been using, the jewelry designers have been using CAD/CAM systems or something else, that becomes the digitization part, some component there. So that's another aspect. And if you look at from that perspective, these global supply chains effectively mean that you would generate data, you will process data, you'll store data wherever in the world it is necessary, and it is also most efficient. In fact, that's the first term that he used, that we will pursue that promote efficiency, equity, and resilience. So when you're looking at efficiency has to be seen holistically, not from the perspective of only one particular type of stakeholders, but rather all sort of stakeholders. So we need to ask certain things to ourselves. Is it more efficient if all servers, everything is within the country? Or for that matter, what would be the repercussions if a hard data localization is mandated? And let me give you an example again from the government itself. Now, it's been about 15 years in this country that we have this concept of state data centers. And state data centers, very rightly, were meant for providing the services by the respective state governments to their population. At the same time, one of the challenges with this concept of SDCs was that, for example, in UP, you had one state data center. In Maharashtra, you had another state data center. But in case something happened to that particular data center, there was no backup. And even when the state government started thinking about, okay, having one more, what they thought, okay, we'll have one in Mumbai, one more in Pune. But nobody's thinking that, okay, if we have one in Mumbai, which is for Maharashtra state, and can we take the secondary data center at Bhubaneswar SDC, and for that matter, Odisha state government could put something in Jaipur. Now that type of thing we have not yet seen. And I think this type of regimented thinking is inhibiting us from leveraging the benefits of these technologies in a full manner. Now let me come to the other aspect, which is about equity. That's the second term he mentioned. Now equity, we need to look at not only of the government, but also from the people at large, businesses, civil society, everybody. Now, is something which is equitable for everybody, or is it only for one type of stakeholders again? And the third thing is, in terms of resilience. So if we have, let's say, this type of a localization mindset, what will happen is a state government, as I mentioned earlier, may say that, okay, the data of my state residents should be stored only within my state. It should not go somewhere else, except maybe for things which come under the union list. Tomorrow, I won't be surprised if that's a thinking. A city might say that, okay, this data should not leave my municipal corporation, my municipal boundaries, or a Gram Panchayat could also do in the same manner. Now, in this type of thing, I think we'll increasingly be closeted ourselves into very narrow and inefficient systems, rather than being in a position to leverage everything. The second aspect is in terms of what is it, so Dr. Patnaik did mention that, okay, some sort of data might be necessary. So nobody's saying that the government employees' records should be stored all over the world. We are not saying that. Or defense personnel's record should be stored all over the world. Or again, some strategic information in the country should be stored elsewhere. At the same time, there's a whole lot of other data which can and should be encouraged to be traveling around the world. And the other aspect is in terms of course, law enforcement access and other things, which Dr. Rai as well as Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar did allude to earlier. I think we need to create mechanisms. And the fact is, yes, I do agree with Dr. Rai that there's a lot of frustration in the Indian law enforcement agencies in terms of getting the data from other countries. But that's MLAT, the mutual legal assistance treaties, are not between companies. They are actually between countries, from one government to another government at that level. And second thing is that just like we have frustration with certain law enforcement agencies getting access from other countries, I've also equally heard from other countries' law enforcement agencies, they also have similar type of concerns when it comes to access from India. So if the pain is on both sides or on all sides, let me put it this way, I think it is also the onus on the governments to increasingly come to a more digital usage of MLAT. So MLAT process itself should be resolved. So for example, on 30th August 2016, when US-India Cyber Cooperation Agreement was signed, one of the items was about increasing the efficiency of MLAT, so reviewing that process. And the last thing that I would like to say is this. When we are looking at resilience, the resilience has to be seen not only in terms of whether we have multiple links. So for example, on the internet, we do have multiple links. Today in the country, we have multiple fiber going from Chennai, from Kochi, from Mumbai and elsewhere. We also need to have resilience, just like this type of fiber links. We also need to have resilience across different data centers so that in case something goes wrong somewhere, we still have a fallback somewhere else. And also depending on the traffic loading itself, because it is ultimately a dynamic thing, things can keep on changing. And the last thing is about whether the catch up between the regulation and the technology. The fact is, yes, technologies will always keep on coming up, and at times it is difficult for regulations to catch up. But sometimes I think it's also the other way. So if you look at the Indian Telegraph Act 1885, the definition of telegraph is so good there that even if perhaps a good lawyer could even argue that even telepathy comes within the realm of telegraph. I hope that nobody does it. But because it uses Hertzian waves, I won't be surprised if somebody could argue even that way. Now, the important thing is this. This definition has not been touched for past, at least for past half century, the definition of telegraph within the Telegraph Act. Of course, many other amendments have happened there. But when, especially in the 90s, when we had to introduce many new services, and I was involved in some of those, especially the internet policy, when we introduced those things, whether it was VSAT, whether it was mobile, paging, radio trunking, email service, etc., within the scope of the telecom services, we never had to revisit the definition of telegraph in the Indian Telegraph Act 1885. So I think if we have the basic principles laid out in the law and which allow enough flexibility to the executive and to the regulators to deal with the issues as they emerge, I think that would be a good way. Thank you.
Thank you, Deepakji. Let me now come to our final speaker from a private sector, a big private sector. Let me pose a couple of related questions to her. There is Saki, there is one school of thought, and we have heard about it even today in this deliberation, which says that data localization is a necessary condition when you look at it from digital ecosystem point of view. It's a necessary condition for our startup ecosystem, for developing startup ecosystem, for enabling innovation, and we also heard contrary views. Then we also see that there is this demand for data portability, interoperability, and things like that. Now, after hearing all four experts of ours in today's session, their views on this subject, what is your view? Do you agree with that thought, that school of thought, or not? And B, what could be possible viable alternatives that we can think of as against looking at data localization purely from the traditional security policing kind of a point of view? So over to you, Aki. And you have about 8 to 10 minutes. Yeah.
Thank you, Bipul. I fundamentally believe that this assertion that data localization is an enabler for domestic startup industry is an infructuous statement. The reason for that is, even if you look at current statistics, these are not my statistics, but statistics which have been put out by the Commerce Ministry. They have made these assertions that India has the second largest startup ecosystem in the world, growing almost year on year on a 10 to 12% run rate. And this has been pretty steady. And almost a third of these startups are technology-led startups. And that is happening as of now without any mandated data localization. So to say that data localization creates conditions for innovation, which is particularly beneficent to domestic startup industry, is an assertion I absolutely reject. I do not think it is backed by any evidence. It can be a philosophical argument, but I mean, economic reorganization or economic policy making is not reliant only on philosophy. It should be based on evidence-based policy making as a principle. So I really don't see the supporting data which kind of goes to support this assertion. The second element, I think, which always gets lost quite a bit, is that data is not exclusive. It by its very nature is non-rivalrous. It's easily replicable. We have seen, and I'm sure many people have seen, there's public well-established research literature which has been put out, where it has been established that an average individual is estimated to hold around 35 data relationships. And we all as individuals, we have these data relationships. We use it for purposes of transactional behavior, which is e-commerce and buying. We use it for friending, for staying connected, for communicating with friends and family. So there are a host of human behaviors which are there, for which data relationships get developed. They pretty much mimic what we have in our real life. So to say that, again, that, there is going to be a certain type of linearity, and therefore I as an individual person, A as an individual is only going to interact with a certain type of application, again, presupposes a certain market condition, which is not, sort of reflective of either human reality or human behavior. So from my perspective, I really think that neither is there sociological reason to support this assertion, nor is there economic evidence to support this assertion. Insofar as the alternative models which you talked about is concerned, in terms of looking at data localization, I think sometimes this argument is made that data localization will lead to alleviation of law enforcement demands for data access. I think what people normally do not recognize or underappreciate is that there's already very good existing mechanisms in terms of demands being made on a variety of intermediaries, including firms like ours, by law enforcement agencies, which have been notified by the MHA, the federal agencies, as well as sub-federal agencies. It's essentially a state DGPs and state police organizations who are in touch with companies and intermediaries for data access when there is legitimate violation of lawful behavior, or there is an incident which requires that kind of metadata access. And that does happen. In fact, if you look at the transparency report put out by intermediaries, and all intermediaries put this out at sort of a certain time scale, a couple of times at least a year, where this data disclosure is made in terms of how much of data has been disclosed to law enforcement agencies, and identify federal and sub-federal disclosures which have been made. So I think there are existing mechanisms even at a firm level which is there. And of course, there was a lot of hope with the India-US strategic dialogue, which would work towards creating that bridge, and Cloud Act definitely is one option which we have been discussing for a very long time. And there was a lot of impetus which was put behind the India-US Track 2, also 1.5 dialogue. Over a period of time, it has atrophied a little bit, and therefore I think there is a requirement to re-energize that pretty vigorously to make sure that whatever are the edge cases which get stuck up and wound up in the MLAT processes is eased up, and that can lead to comfort in terms of speed of response, as well as in terms of just a bilateral relationship between the two countries. The last point which you talked about in terms of data, I think your question was really about data portability. That's what you mean by interoperability, I assume. Now look, as a company, that is something which we have taken a very public position in terms of supporting this. In fact, Mark Zuckerberg has taken a very public position on this, and we have said that regulation should guarantee the principle of data portability. And I think the Justice Sri Krishna Commission report also considered this aspect. I do know that people here, like our Member of Parliament, Rajiv Chandrasekhar, who is the member of the JPC, also are actively looking at the data portability question. And that is something which, increasingly firms are embracing as a notion that individuals should have the ability to download their own. For instance, we have a DYI tool, download your own information tool. You can download your data, and also which they have provided to us by way of using our services. And they can also be using that with other services that they choose to use. So I think we are looking to the PDP bill. I do hope that there is some acceleration, and it is not a 2-year time horizon, because businesses typically like certainty. And the JPC will put the right level of energy behind this to engage with all points of view, and essentially engage in decision making, which helps in economic reorganization in a way which is reflective of the evidence which is there in the marketplace, as well as takes into consideration human behaviors and sociological patterns which inform how what are the types of data relationships human society has.
So thank you, Akib. So there we come to an end to the initial part of this panel discussion. Now it is time for interaction among the panelists, interaction between the panelists and the other participants. And we are right on time, actually. So let me thank all of you for that. Now I'll hand this over to conduct the interactive session to Uday. But before that, I have a question. Now we have heard 5 of you, policymakers, lawmakers, experts, from private sector. Now, even after hearing all of you, and there is a lot of learning from all of you, definitely, there is so much of wisdom, collectively as well as individually. So my fundamental question is that even after having such wisdom collectively within our country, why are we trying to make this thing so complicated? Is it in our system that we always try to make simple things complicated? To put it in a more economic theory language, rent-seeking kind of an approach? Maybe Dr. Patnaik, maybe Mr. Chandrasekhar will be in a position to answer this. May not be in this platform. Maybe we need to talk to you personally on one-to-one basis. That's the fundamental question that I have. And this is not just for this legislation.
Mr.
There are
Chandrasekhar will
many
answer
such
this
examples.
question very well.
Look,
There are many such examples. I don't want to
Mr.
go.
Chandrasekhar will answer this question very well.
no,
He can only answer.
one of the
Before that, let me hand it over to Uday and let him conduct this, because I think there is going to be some fireworks now. Thank you.
So before I come in, Mr. Chandrasekhar, maybe you'd like to answer to Mr. Chatterjee, and then I'll open the floor. We already have received several questions for all the panelists. So over to you, Mr. Chandrasekhar.
No, look, it is one of the abiding mysteries of policy making in India on why policies end up creating more confusion, litigation than solving people's problems. I mean, it's one of those things that I don't think there is an answer for. Even if you ask the wisest of politicians, they don't have an answer. But anyway, leave that as it may to the side. On the technology space, my answer is very simple. Every one of the legislations that today impact or regulate this sector are old by not just decades, as Mr. Maheshwari pointed out, the Telegraph Act. The Telegraph Act is whatever, 1800 something. The telecom policy, the last telecom policy was NTP 99, where the internet was not even anywhere on the radar. The IT Act was last done in 2008. It has never been comprehensively reviewed after that. The IT guidelines, the intermediary guidelines keep getting reviewed and changed from a very strategic, narrow focus perspective. I personally believe, and I've said this repeatedly in Parliament and to my bosses in government, that it is time now for us, if India wants to be and has to be and will be a technology superpower, we have to ab initio go back to basics and redraw the legislative and regulatory framework from scratch. And so therefore, we have to address this with a view of enabling the growth of this industry, enabling this, and at the same time, addressing Dr. Gulshan Rai's issues and everybody else's issues on the issue of how to secure the nation, how to ensure that in the event of a public security event, there is access to data, there is access to investigative agencies, but we must go back, in my opinion, ab initio. And a lot of the problems today, Mr. Chatterjee, that you are referring to come from silo approaches to policy making. You fix one problem without understanding what other part of the ecosystem is getting broken. So I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. And I think there is a reason behind it. And I will tell you very briefly what is the reason. If I look at our policy making scenario, the bureaucracy I'm talking about, many of my friends, our batchmates, they are now joint secretary. But when we studied masters, we were in the transition phase. Now, what we studied in our schools and colleges, it was always quote unquote control. The job is to control. The job is not to facilitate. But I think Dr. Patnaik is also, he knows the system inside out. I think as we move forward over the next 5 to 7 years, we are going to see people in the bureaucracy who have seen in their school days or college days that how our economy opened up. The benefits we started getting as a result of opening up. Not from control regime to a facilitation regime. And that is going to take some more time. So how are we going to do the interactive session? So may I request Uday?
Sure. Thank you, Bipul sir. So as I mentioned, we have got several questions from the floor. Given the paucity of time, I'll take one question for each of the panelists in the order. So Dr. Rai, the first question is for you. Based on what you have said, does that mean that the Indian government cannot impose data localization today? And if so, then can it ban the 59 apps that it has based on Section 69A of the Information Technology Bill? The question has been asked by Freni Patel. Over to you, Dr. Rai.
Thank you very much. But before I answer this question, let me say a few words to Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar. I think Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, I'm not in the government and we are more friends. We are not in opponent position today there. So we are more friends. My position is somewhat like you. I'm not a member of parliament. I had the loyalty of serving more than 38 years to the government. So I have a loyalty to the government. But to the logical and legitimate point. So I have the liberty to take the industry view because I am also seeing that aspect there. Now, often criticism is made to IT Act, which I have the drafter 2000 and 2008. Let me also say that your blocking of 59 apps, 59 apps wouldn't have been possible without that provision of IT Act, for which I got so many abuses for years together. That also I must say that. But now coming back to the question which has been asked to me, is that, well, Mr. Chandrasekhar, I don't mean anything. I'm only saying that we are friends today. We are friends today.
No, I'm perfectly fine. I enjoy conversations and we are all agree to disagree in some issues and we'll agree to agree on many issues.
Exactly. But coming back to the question, you see, I did not say, and I think in whatever I said, Dr. Patnaik went further there. I said, look at the issue of enforceability and it will impact your business tomorrow or day after tomorrow because technology is changing. So I'm not, I can quote so many cases which are happening today, but it's not a forum to quote technologically so many cases there. We need to take a balanced view. What we can do, what we don't have to do. And I think Dr. Patnaik and Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, everybody said very categorically, there is certain data which you need to store in India. And I must also say that any data which is flowing on a public network, there cannot be a data localization. For data localization, two conditions need to be met there. The data has to be on the internal network, which are not going out.
Absolutely. Have to be generated here.
There should not be any authentication to any app there. Today, all your applications are being accessed through app business. App there, everyone is doing the app and you're accessing services. I don't want to come to the deep technological thing, which I am looking for opportunity, Dr. Patnaik and Rajiv Chandrasekhar, to give me to say before the Parliament Standing Committee. I say that's why my point is like technical. How we are moving. Business may move up and down there. I mean, data localization is happened. I said, why RBI has failed to do that, implement the 6th April 2018 notification. I said, I'm accountable for whatever I said it. So why not we look at what is feasible, what is not feasible in terms of what is a technological processes, and why should we unnecessarily load our regulators there? There are so many other principles to do that. And I certainly have a lot of disagreement what my friend Deepak Maheshwari said it there. It's not easy to conduct the MLAT. Europe is not willing to do agreement with you because you don't have a Data Protection Act. US is not willing to discuss with the Cloud Act, but you don't have a Data Protection Act. So we need to have a framework to do that. But I think we must look at it that our framework should be interoperable, because when we go to GDPR or when we go to the Cloud Act or we go to CBPR or APEC countries there, both the regulation, both the legal framework will be compared, and it has to be done within the framework, within the ambit of their own framework. So we need to be flexible. We need to keep that we need to recognize them and they need to recognize us. So we should have an interoperability. We must look at interoperability of the things, and we must have inconsistency should not be there. I'm seeing one document floating on the internet putting the draft e-commerce policy there. They want to raise another e-commerce regulator. And I think the media also covered the e-commerce regulator. And their whole issue is, another regulator for data. They're talking about more stringent law than what the PDP bill says about it. So I think there is an inconsistency. We need to look at those things. And within those framework, we must take a balanced view, what we can do, what we cannot do. That will be good in the interest of the country. I mean, we are all patriotic to the country. We must look at it, do that. And I'm sure I have a full faith in the JPC today, because everyone in JPC, very enlightened member. And everyone is looking at, not today, it is going to be a landmark kind of a thing, legislation for generations to come there. They are first going to take up further what Supreme Court has said, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar has said, the Privacy Fundamental Act. They're going to take it further, make the first legislation for enforceability of that legislation. It's a landmark kind of a legislation. They have to look at all practical point of view. We can do today. We can do, the laws exist today, we can do that. But whether are we able, even if we do that, are we able to do? I quoted the example of UPI payment. NPCI has all agreements with every party. Are they able to enforce that? Certainly no. So enforceability, in my view today, I think if we cannot enforce in a good law, the law is as bad as anything anybody else can say. So let us not look at what we can do, what we cannot do. I think we must look at collectively in a balanced kind of a thing, without any caste, creed, or any kind of a thing for the future of the generation.
Thank you, Dr. Rai. I'll just move on to the next speaker. The question is from Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar, and it flows very well from what Dr. Rai just mentioned. And the question is, if data localization is a result of siloed thinking, how do you think we can institutionalize a whole of government thinking on data policy issues? The question is from Mr. Amol Kulkarni.
So I think more such public discourse. I think the people of India, see, look, the biggest beneficiaries of India that is much more digitized and is a technology power is finally each individual citizen. And I think as long as there is more and more conversations like this that we have in the public domain, and it is not left to these small rooms where there are some bureaucrats and some politicians that sit down and make these policies that impact millions of Indians. If we do this out in the open, we will get better policy making. I just squarely believe in that. I think, as Dr. Rai said and many of the panelists said, India is sitting on the cusp of something very big in the entire global technology space. We can define it, we can influence the future of technology, we can influence the future of the internet. We have to, therefore, our policy making, our regulatory framework, our institutions have to be world-class. We can't benchmark the technology policy making or the technology regulatory framework with, let us say, to make an tenuous argument with the education ministry or the health ministry. We have to do things in this space because our peers are the best in the world. Our competitors are the US, our competitors are South Korea, Japan, Israel. And therefore our policy making, our regulatory framework, the capability of our institutions have to be built with that in mind. Number one. Number two, I'll just add this one point, taking up to prove that me and Mr. Rai Dr. Rai can agree on things. I completely agree with him that this piecemeal creation of regulators is just nonsense.
Absolutely, absolutely.
We must create one or two institutions which have the capacity, capability, whether it is TRAI, whether it is Competition Commission, and have a framework where regulatory institutions can work together in a cooperative manner, rather than at the drop of a hat go and create one more parking lot for retired bureaucrats. So that we don't want to do. I would rather have bureaucrats come to parliament like my friend Amar Patnaik. Better to have them in parliament. We can pin them down there. So I genuinely believe fewer institutions, but better institutions and world-class institutions, and definitely world-class policy making. And that is why I said before, let us go back, take all of these policies that have been built over several decades and years and redo them, harmonize them to our vision of the future.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. I know we are running late, but I'll quickly move on to the next speaker. And that is a question for Mr. Amar Patnaik. Finance Minister Nirmala Sitharaman has said that the government will bring out a policy for building data center parks throughout the country. How do you think, if the government feels so strongly about data localization, how can it incentivize more such local storage of data?
Well, you'll be surprised to know that currently, even if somebody wants to set up a data center in the private sector, I think they have to have clearances from about 50, there are about 60 licenses, I think 60 clearances they require from about 15 departments. Now, I think that's the first thing that they can do is to de-notify or whatever, de-license this kind of stuff and make it simpler to get a permission to set up a data center. Now, when you set up a data center, I think the Prime Minister did say about this. See, in Orissa, for example, I've seen being in the bureaucracy, ArcelorMittal left the country because of land issues. POSCO left because of land issues. Land is a big issue. So the Prime Minister's suggestion for having a plug and play kind of a system is really fitting well into this kind of thing, if we can really establish this infrastructure. Second is we have a lot to do relating to the quality of supply of electricity. We might say a lot of things. We have been reforming for such a long period of time. We have, that's what I say in public policy, both while practicing it and as a student, we find that in India, public policy is supplied at the drop of a hat without knowing how it will be implemented, whether it is being monitored and whether it is being reviewed. And that gives scope to a lot of rent that Mr. Chatterjee was talking about. So I think the incentivization here would be basically in dismantling the too many license Raj, whatever you say. The second aspect is if we get the volume of data as a result of data localization and can store it properly, because we need to have that many centers very quickly, only then the cost of data storage and processing will come down. Otherwise, the cost of compliance will be very high for any kind of startups. So we have to do both the things simultaneously. And the last thing that is to incentivize these data centers, I think we also have to be cognizant of the fact that we cannot force them to do something because of the RBI regulations or because of the PDP bill. We have to give an environment in which the broad public infrastructure should be able to give them the security of the data, the security of data flow also within the country itself, as Mr. Maheshwari was talking about, and the framework, the legal framework for having the, I actually look at the future of having data-based trade agreements. I really look at that as the future, which would happen, in which you have a reciprocal arrangement for cross-border data flow with those countries which have the similar kind of regime that as you have. So these are my initial thoughts on this. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Patnaik. Moving on to Mr. Deepak Maheshwari, the question is, in the light of the current debate, what can be the principles of data sharing which can be followed by global cooperation models of data flows? The question was asked by Shubhangi. Over to you, Deepakji.
Thanks, Uday. So first of all, let me just clarify what Dr. Rai mentioned. He is very right that just because we do not have the personal data protection bill, that's coming in the way of some of these type of global arrangements. But now that we are looking at the PDP, I think the committee should also look at this aspect, that this will have a bearing on those type of future negotiations, or for that matter, the ongoing negotiations and arrangements that we may have or we may like to have in future. Second thing is, Mr. Rajiv Chandrasekhar did mention about the siloed approach, and I fully agree. And in fact, just 2 weeks back, I wrote about it, that we do need to revive and we need to dust off and maybe update and seriously think about the Convergence Communications Bill 2001, which of course had lapsed way back in 2004. Now on this whole issue of data sharing arrangement, as Akib was already mentioning in terms of what the mechanisms are. So one is obviously people, so many times the law enforcement agencies themselves need to utilize better what the available avenues exist. So for example, at times people do send, even today, and that's a fact, despite the fact that we have an email policy, etc., at times, and this happens with both global companies, but also with Indian companies, that you get a law enforcement request, which comes from a webmail ID. Okay. Now it becomes very difficult for people to determine whether this request itself is genuine, whether this is authorized, etc., etc. That's one area. Second area is very simple, is in terms of standardizing the templates for what type of information you're asking. Oftentimes the request is, please provide us all information related to X. Now, which becomes very vague. At the same time, if the request is that, okay, please provide us the IP address, or let's say the CDR or anything like that related to this particular ID on this date and time, that becomes more specific and people are in a position to respond much faster on those type of things. So I would say that having a bit more capacity building exercises, which also includes people from the ministries that have these mechanisms, also from the Ministry of Home Affairs as well as the state police and the companies. And I think if we can develop those type of models, and some of this work, by the way, had been done by under the aegis of Council of Europe way back in 2007, 2008. And these are voluntary guidelines for cooperation between law enforcement and service providers. I think that's something which we can tweak and adopt within the country also. Thank you.
How will can you hear me?
Yeah.
How will data portability enhance user welfare in terms of enhancing the uptake and usage of data-driven services, especially in light of the COVID pandemic, wherein reliance on digital technologies have increased? The question is from Siddharth Narayan to Akidas.
So data portability essentially is about giving control and choice to consumers, right? Like you decide your data in terms of downloading that, and also having access to information in terms of the ways that your data may have been utilized by the app that you have given your data to. But also what is happening at an enterprise level is that companies are building norms in terms of participating in projects like the data transfer project, for example, which exists between Apple, Google, Microsoft, Twitter. It's an open source initiative which is designed to enable better data portability by developing tools and standards which will enable users to request secure, privacy protected direct data transfers between services without having the friction of loading, download and re-upload, etc. So I think as you have more of this becoming the norm, the kind of friction which you see between apps, that is going to diminish quite a bit. And at the same time, as a user, you will be able to control in terms of the kind of permissions which you are giving for that kind of sharing.
Thank you, Aki. I'll just take the last question, which is the most burning question and been raised by several participants. And that's a question for Amar Patnaik and Mr. Chandrasekhar. What is the status of the JPC? And when is the Joint Parliamentary Committee likely to start meeting with the stakeholders on the PDP bill 2019? So Mr. Patnaik, Mr. Chandrasekhar, whoever wants to take that.
We have discussed this. I think we are in the process quite the stage of interaction with the ministry, with the Aadhaar authorities, and then with the Ministry of Information, of the Ministry of Home Affairs. And that's going on, and that is, I think, more or less well on way. And as far as calling the people who have made representations before the committee, I think Rajiv would agree that probably, I think they are working that out as to when they would be called, but we were stopped because of the lockdown, and nothing has happened after that. Now, as to when we are going to have that, that's a difficult question to have, because just I'm a member of the Standing Committee on Finance, and I suddenly saw yesterday that they have fixed a meeting on 27th of July, a physical meeting. I don't know if Delhi situation is what it is. I'm not going. So I really don't. And as far as virtual meetings are concerned, I think that is not yet been given a go-ahead by the chairman of the Rajya Sabha or by the speaker of the Lok Sabha, because I think they have to change the rules and in the rules committee and whatever. So I still feel that currently there is. It's very amorphous. I really don't know when it's going to be called, unless Rajiv has some better or more kind of definite answer.
No, I think I will just add and say that I think we had made considerable amount of progress in the early days of the JPC, and there was a certain momentum that had
Yes.
on
Yes.
wide consensus on the need to look at this bill in detail.
You can't share details.
Yeah, I can't tell you details, but of course, but the COVID has come as a bit of a setback. How this restarts, I think, will be left now to the chairman of the committee, chairperson of the committee, and the speaker of the Lok Sabha, and the chairperson of the Rajya Sabha, on what form it will take, because it's clearly not possible for other people who want to depose in front of the committee to come all the way to Delhi. I mean, that's like putting them at risk. Just by way of an aside and closer on a sense of humor, Amar has a luxury of staying in Orissa. I have come here to Delhi because I have a PAC meeting tomorrow, and then I have a
Yeah, good. Yeah, you're very conscientious, I must say. Conscientious MP, member of parliament.
Okay, great. Thank you.
All right. Thank you very much. I think Aki wants to say something. Yes, Aki. You need to unmute yourself.
Yeah. I wanted to ask a follow-up question, if I may. Isn't there any thinking in terms of using virtual mechanisms to seek oral evidence from people by the JPC? I mean, is that a possibility? Because we don't know. I mean, 2020 pretty much maybe like this.
No, so Anki, as Amar said, Mr. Patnaik said that there has been some discussion on that, but the Secretariat has, in a sense, both the houses have basically come back and saying that they have some issues, both from a point of view of the rules of business and legality of these meetings, as well as capability technologically to deliver on that. But that conversation is ongoing now. So you can see some of these committees are now meeting physically, but when committees have to interact with witnesses, it is quite clear that it is not going to be possible to do so in the conventional way that the committees did before. So I think this will be like a one step forward, one step forward, and then wait and see what happens kind of an approach, which is to see if some witnesses can be brought in on board remotely, virtually, and see how that works.
Thank you, Mr. Chandrasekhar. I think with that, we come to the end, and I just request very quickly my colleague Kapil Gupta to deliver the vote of thanks, and let's close the webinar. Over to you, Kapil.
Sure. Thanks, Uday. On behalf of CUTS, I want to wholeheartedly show my gratitude to all the speakers and participants for sharing their insights and experiences on the subject matter. I think the discussions such as this are very crucial and fundamental in informing the policy narrative for creating an effective and optimal policy. And with this, I would like to take a moment to summarize some of the key takeaways from the webinar. So we need to look at data localization from the lens of technology, enforceability, and legality, as the tech is flat in nature. Data access issue can be solved without disrupting innovation and choice. The policy approach should not be to mandate and force, but the need is to incentivize the industry and take the policy advantage. Thus, it is imperative now for India to go back to basics and redraw regulatory approaches to enable growth of tech industries and build institutional capabilities that can work together. With this, I conclude this webinar, and once again, I thank you all, and we look forward to engaging with you further on this subject matter. Take care and stay safe.